Hello, everybody. Today is Thursday, February 6th. It is 9 o'clock Eastern Standard Time in East Tennessee. And I'm just going to do a quick video on some leak breaking news that came out this afternoon that I think is really important. And it's important to the topic that I've been following, and that has been the Russo-Ukrainian war. So apparently the peace plan leaked, and these are the key components. So let me share it with you. Trump-Ukraine peace plan. Trump aims to have Zelensky agree to a ceasefire by April 20th, stopping Russia's advance. Ukraine would be barred from joining NATO under the plan. Kiev would recognize Russian sovereignty over annexed lands and withdraw troops from Kursk. European, possibly British, troops would police a demilitarized zone with no U.S. involvement. All right, so let's do a brief history. All right, and I'll make it quick and to the point so we understand this peace plan. All right, because I've talking about it pieces here, but I'm going to do a quick summary of what happened. Okay, one thing you have to know about Ukraine is that Ukraine's borders are based on the 1991 borders. Okay, and it was put together throughout the Soviet Union's era. Okay, so like Crimea was added to it as a Soviet republic from the Soviets. Novorossiya, which is basically that whole strip from Ukraine just to the mainland all the way up to now what is the Donbass, was added to it as well. So over time, and it was part of, but they were all Soviets, right? The whole point was to weaken the nationalism because it was all about the ideology of the state. Communism, okay? So basically, okay, you had the handshake, oh, you're not going to be in NATO, nothing in writing, you know, Russia, U.S. and other countries recognize Ukraine's sovereignty, and we could go all through that. Okay, so you also have to realize that Western Ukraine, the Galicia region, was also part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Okay, and then after World War I, that area was actually put into Poland. Okay, so in the West. And those people, okay, Western Ukraine, also known as Galicians. Okay, that is the strength of the Ukrainian nationalist movement. All right, now I'm not going to get into the details of World War II, but there was an SS regiment, Galicia, but the majority of Ukrainians, about 80%, that we know them as in these borders, fought with the Soviets against the Nazis. There was a group that didn't, and they committed atrocities along with the Nazis. A lot of it had to do with anti-Polish because there was a Polish-Ukrainian war in the period during the negotiations of the Versailles. And there were actually two republics that declared independence, the Western Ukrainian Republic and the Central Ukrainian Republic. One out of Kiev, the central, and the western out of Lviv. Okay, and the Allies decided to put it all in Poland because they wanted a strong Poland as a balance to Germany. So when the Poles were taken over and break, the Ukrainians, particularly the ones in the West, the Galicians, saw it as an opportunity to get our state. And just the way Croatia was an independent republic, sort of, it was Nazi Germany we are talking about, but within the German Empire, German Reich, the Third Reich. And they had a lot of autonomy and so forth. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of crazy stuff that happened in Croatia because of that, you know, that big camp called, I think it's Rabinovac, or Rabinovac. I can never remember how to pronounce it. But anyway, that they were thinking the same kind of thing. So the point of the matter is, there is a distinct history from those people in today's Ukraine in the East and in the West. Okay? So in the East, they are completely ethnic Russian. Now, even ethnic Ukrainians in the Central, still Russian is their main language. You go to Odessa, they mostly speak Russian. In Kiev, they will speak parts Russian and so forth. But they still consider them Ukraine. Then over since 91, a lot of them in central part of Ukraine identified Ukrainian, part of the country Ukraine for the last 30 years, you know. So basically, and if you look at elections going back, particularly since the 2000s, okay, the more pro-Western parties in the got more votes in the West. So as you went more Eastern Ukraine, the more the vote was against countries that were not I want to be part in the West, I still want to be aligned to Russia somehow. Okay, no talk of independence or anything like that. So basically, there was a whole thing with Yanukovych in the Maidan coup in 2014. Not going to get into those details, but basically what happened, U.S. was involved. Victoria Nuland, there she was on a phone call about who was that was leaked, who was going to be the new leader. So we were clearly there. Senator McCain and Graham, they've always been involved in getting that out because they wanted the Russian influence out to push them east to get them west because there's a lot of resources, major amounts of resources. A matter of fact, as we know that Trump talked about the resources, but if you look at a map, which I have, and I just didn't put it in my last video, but I have a map of all the resources of where they are. The majority of them are in the Donbass, already under Russian control. And Russia doesn't even need that because they have so much there. But the thing is, the people are there. So Ukraine was in a position and that's why Biden was put in charge of, Biden was put in charge of the Ukraine policy under the Obama administration. It is not coincidence. He did the old, if you don't fire the prosecutor, you're not going to get the $1 billion. And what did Biden say? Oh, son of a bitch, they fired the prosecutor. Okay? It's not coincident that his son Hunter was on the board. And it is not coincidence that they used Ukraine to go after Trump. Now, if you also remember, there was a big magazine article, I believe it was in the Politico, right after the 2016 election, which shows you how, because the whole Russian interference was going on, but they were like, well, hey, Ukraine, how they supported Clinton, because they were in bed with the neocons, the big establishment. Now, I don't know what the plan is, but I think the idea is if you continue to push Russia out into the east because of the stuff in Ukraine, right? Remember, it's the breadbasket of Europe for agriculture in central and western Ukraine and all the big industry and resources in eastern Ukraine. So you got Burisma, American money coming in, and then you have big companies like Cargill and Monsanto. They're buying up properties there. So they have this whole vision of Ukraine. The problem is the people in the east were ethnically Russian. And what happened was when Yanukovych was ousted after violence, I think 376 people died because of violence after the Maidan coup, which started as a peaceful protest from West Ukrainians because it was basically a deal. Where do we go Russia? Do we go Ukraine? Russia said you can go what you want, but then they're like, we're not going to pay for A, B, and C anymore. So Yanukovych was in stuff, and Putin could have backed him. He didn't. He chose not to. And then, had the violence, whatever, and so forth. So Yanukovych is out. So basically in 2014, the Lugansk region and the Donetsk region declared independence. When they declared independence, a war broke out between the Ukrainians. Now, Russia got involved and backed the militia groups of Donetsk and Lugansk. I don't think they did directly except with supplies, but in terms of troops, I believe the Wagner group got involved and so forth. But basically, 2015, 2016 runs around, and if you want to see what's going on, back me up, is go YouTube, John Mersheimer, Ukraine 2015, 2016. He gave great lectures, predicted everything to this date, and gave you, going back to 1991, how it happened. His videos and lectures are an hour and a half each. I'm doing this video in hopefully 15 minutes. So basically, it happened. The Ukrainian army had to surrender. Germany and France brokered what was called the Minsk Accords. There were 2 rounds of them, Minsk 1, Minsk 2. And what it involved is, now you got to understand, is that under these Poroshenko, and even and then reinstituted slightly a little bit under Zelensky, from what I understand, is that even though he ran as a peace candidate, why run as a peace candidate if there wasn't a war in Ukraine? Which, you see, the Western media, corporate media, and elites want us to think the war started really in that February 2022. It really didn't. This goes back 2014. Okay. So the militias have been fighting them for whatever. So basically, they would they try to Ukrainize the entire nation, the areas that were not ethnically Ukrainian. So they banned Russian language in school and things like that. So you take that in, and then the person that these people heavily voted for was thrown out violently. That's when they declared independence. So they lost, the Ukrainians, and the Minsk Accord. So what was supposed to happen was Donetsk and Lugansk are supposed to get all those basically like states. They were going to be, in charge of their education and given lots of autonomy, but still stay in Ukraine. Now, keep this in mind. If Russia really wanted these territories, the Ukrainian army was defeated. Lugansk and Donetsk probably would have joined Russia. All they had to do was march in, and they didn't. It would have been easier then than what they did in 2022, and definitely now. But they didn't. So anyway, you also have to keep in mind what really was a red flag going back to 2008 Munich is when it was specifically mentioned Georgia and Ukraine in NATO. Okay. Now, the argument that NATO is a defensive organization is ridiculous. One, Tucker Carlson pointed out to Piers Morgan recently in his interview, what about Serbia? Okay. What NATO country did Serbia attack? Okay. Two is that you can't just look at it as defensive organization. The United States is the parent of this alliance. We're the only nation that has projection power and logistic power to really project, okay? And that power, the United States, because Ukraine would be a NATO country, would be right up against Russia's border. If Ukraine joined NATO and United States never deployed missiles to Romania and build bases in Poland and run by the American military, Russia's not threatened by Estonia or Ukraine. It doesn't want American weapons in it. Just like if BRICS was a military alliance, we wouldn't want Chinese missiles being operated by Chinese personnel on the Mexican border. Okay, it's the same thing. So that was a trigger. So then the Minsk Accords were never implemented. As a matter of fact, there was shelling by artillery, and that entire time Ukraine was building up, and there was still fighting between the Ukraine military and these militias all the way going up. Okay, and then Russia started building up their force in, before Christmas of 2021, up along the Ukrainian border, along the Donbass, and up in the north in Kharkiv region, and so forth. And they put it there. Now, at the time, there was a lot of shelling. And if you remember, right before the war began, the incursion by the Russian military, the special military operation, there was a lot of shelling. Most of it was from Ukrainians onto the militia. And, okay, because I don't know if they believed they were going to go in or not, but that was the case. But there were about 40 to 60,000 Ukrainian troops amassed there. And Angela Merkel admitted in an article, as other people have said as well, that the whole point of the Minsk Accords was to give time for NATO to train and build up the Ukrainian military. Matter of fact, I know someone in the Tennessee National Guard who was there before the war broke out. What is the Tennessee National Guard doing in freaking Ukraine? Unless they're doing a service, okay, for that. Because there's no national interest to the U.S., particularly United States citizen there, okay? So, what happened? They announced the independence, Donetsk and Lugansk. Russia moves in, and there you have it, the war begins. They moved in with about 90 to 120,000 troops. They had a small area coming down the north in Kiev, and they wanted to force the negotiation. They had deals, and that was it. The United States, with the Brits, and NATO said, nope, Ukraine, you're going to fight this war, and you do it. Okay? So the Russians went, because at the time the Russian army was about 450. It was designed for defensive mostly. Okay? No 120,000 troops was going to come in and occupy, particularly central and western Ukraine, where they don't want anything to do with Russians, particularly the western part. So that's it. And when Russia realized that, oh no, NATO's going to give them everything they need and all this stuff. Okay, so then we get the big push. The Ukrainians, they're winning victory after victory after victory, victory. That's not really what happened. What happened is Russia just withdrew because they knew they couldn't hold the existing territories they held. And they just dramatically withdrew to it. So they formed what they called the Seredvikin line. Okay? And so while the winter came and everything, and we're announcing to the world for 6 months, our media, that there's going to be this big Ukrainian offensive, the Russians dug in. They use old defensives from the back from the war of 2014, 15, 16 onward, all those fortifications that were built, and they added to it. They put 3 layers deep, and they built it. And they started to recruit like crazy. They also called up 300,000 people who already had military prior service, and most of those were retrained and were replacing people in support roles all over Russia and other locations, and the fresher troops were going up. And they just started building and building and building and building and building and building. They also have a surge capacity in the manufacturing, so they started making more weapons and more weapons. And they kind of just sat back for a while. And then the counteroffensive came, and Russia started moving more and more troops to the line. The counteroffensive was ridiculous. You don't do blitzkrieg without air support against a highly fortified force, and a force that is larger than yours and has more artillery than yours. And that's what we had the poor Ukrainians do. So the entire counteroffensive was a failure. And then Russia started to do a steamroller all along the front. Bakhmut, Avdiivka, and it's just now village after village. And contrary to what you hear at the West, they are casualty centric because they don't want to go full war. Because contrary to what you're hearing is they're actually having a very large surge in their economy. They just gave 9.5% raises to veterans, disabled veterans, pensioners, that's like Social Security people, other people in that. They just paid down debt, not deficit, debt, which is under 20% of their GDP, by $27 billion. Their price parity GDP is now the largest in Europe. And price parity is all that matters, okay? It's all that matters. If I live in Tennessee and a 6-pack of beer is $9 and I go to New York and it's $13, okay, and I make, as long as I make enough where that covers it, that's all that matters because it's what it buys. That's what price parity is. So they're doing fine. They are not in full mobilization. They are not in all-out war. I'm sure there have been strains here and there and so forth. They've had to purchase certain equipment so they can focus on concentration because they don't want to alter to a full wartime economy because they want to keep the economy going. They also have no desire to control Ukrainians. They just want to do this. Now, the people in Donetsk and Lugansk at the beginning of the war were like, you got to stay because the SBU will come in and just retaliate against us and so forth. So they were integrated into the forces as well. So the point of the matter is this onslaught. Now, Sierski has said in an interview with The Independent, well, we're recruiting 20,000 a month, and that's not enough to keep up. So you're losing over 20, we'll say 25 to 30,000 people a month. What? Okay, that's why they lowered the age of conscription, and they'll lower it again. Meanwhile, Russia does not have conscription. As a matter of fact, when you factor in price parity, their contracted soldiers make about the same in the United States when they're hired. So the point of the matter is they have the industrial capacity. They're not at a full war footing. They've rotated in all these troops who have massive amount of experience. At any time, they're about 700,000, 600 to 700,000 troops on the front. And they've raised up to 1.2 million, 400,000. So they basically have the same army they had at the beginning of the war right now in Russia and deployed in a few other places. But basically at the beginning of the war with an additional 700,000, all with combat experience on that line. And they go slow, and they use drones, and they use artillery, and they're cautious. So the question is with this peace plan, all right, they are going to benefit. I'm not going to say they win because they're not going to get all what they want. They're not going to get that denazification, which is the elimination of that ultra-nationalism from government under Trump's peace plan. British troops are not going there. They were a participant in the war. They were the only way a demilitarized zone with international peacekeepers would be approved by Russia if it was non-interested parties. I don't know, Indians, Brazilians, and maybe even Hungarians they'll go for, or Serbians or something like that. You know, who knows? But that would be that, okay? But the NATO pact, that's a check. That is, again, Ukraine and NATO is an existential threat to Russia. It doesn't matter what the United States feels about it. Doesn't matter what the British feels about it, the Canadians. That's how Russia feels about it. That's how the Russian people feel about it. So that's a must. Russia's not giving back any territory. It's non-negotiable. They're not going to do it. One, they also don't trust the West, even if they agree to do that, because it'll be dependent. Is this something that's going to be passed by Congress, or it's just Trump's word, and then the next president comes in and throws it out? So, and if they think that the next president's come in and there's a demilitarized zone, they'll come in and take it to prevent the West from coming in with weapons. So the point of the matter is that's a key component. But Russia doesn't have to give anything up. That's the reality. Nothing. Okay? They don't want the war to go on anymore. If you give them NATO, they keep the 4 territories, Crimea through Novorossiya. Maybe they'll give up parts of the areas of Kharkov, because I believe the main reason why they did that was more for pressure and to create another front for the Ukrainians. All right, because the longer that front is, that steamroller can just go slow and slow, just missiles and drones and artillery and airstrikes. Iskanders, Oreshniks are being developed right now once they hit the battle. So, point of matter is, in my opinion, that Russia's in the driver's seat. And Trump does not have the leverage he thinks he has. Does not have the leverage he thinks he has. So, I think that Ukraine should take probably the first offer if they wants it, because I know at the minimum Russia's going to want no Western presence, no Ukraine military, anything east of the Dnieper. So, and if a peace deal isn't making, I believe that's where they'll go and they'll stop. And they'll take Kiev and Odessa if they have to eventually. But overall, I do like this plan. It's realistic because of the NATO. It recognizes the NATO concerns of Russia. It recognizes that Russia's not giving up the territory. And those are 2 key elements that are non-starters for the Russians. So that's good. And I think this is a really good foothold that if this is the foundation of the plan, I think this is a good foundation to start on in negotiations. And remember, Zelensky, the 2-bit pseudo-dictator that he is, who canceled elections, banned political opposition parties, banned certain journalists, taken over all state media, and even banned the Ukrainian Orthodox Church and replaced it with some sort of Ukrainian nationalistic church thingy. Okay? Has basically, under their constitution, been illegitimate since last May. So the point of the matter is that the Russians don't consider him legitimate. So, and that's a good position them from their point of view to take, because they want him out anyway, and they'd want to bring in some more neutral party in that. But you remember too, the Russians have to remember now with all these Ukrainians that are really Russian, now in Russian lands, the remaining parts of Ukraine will be more Ukrainish than before, right? If I take Canada. You got French Canada. If Quebec were to become independent, but Montreal stayed part of Canada, the French influence is now diluted. Well, that's the same thing here. The Russian influence in Ukraine is diluted. So there probably should be some deal about who people will live. Well, I'm ethnic Russian. I'd like to go to the Russian side, and I kind of got trapped. I'd like to go back to the Ukraine side of kind of like switching and things like that and so forth. I even said it was possible. Let Western Ukraine around Lviv become its own country, join NATO. Central Ukraine from Odessa to Kiev, completely independent. Put someone in there, the Swiss Guards or something. That's your demilitarized zone. And then the east of we'll give them a little bit of farmland on the east, but basically the Russian area and a little bit towards Russia. And Russia has a natural barrier for safety. They have a demilitarized neutral country there that's demilitarized, and then NATO's on the west. So that was a good foundation. Hope that was a good quick history. I wanted to keep it around 15, 20 minutes and that. So I just wanted to, because I've always touched on this, but I never really put it all together in a summary way. You can go on longer and longer with a lot of the details and dates and specifics, but I wanted to hit on the key points, especially now that this Trump plan has leaked, and I like the gist of it. So if you like this video, please follow, like, and share. You can follow me on X at Patriot Planner 1 or on Getter at Patriot Planner. Have a great day, guys. Bye.